To politics now, San Antonio native Julian Castro brought his presidential campaign to his hometown tonight. The former mayor toured the Animal Defense League facility and announced a new plan to protect animals. Eyewitness News reporter Vanessa Croy talked to Castro about his proposal.
With just a week to go to qualify for a coveted spot in the next presidential debate, Julian Castro made a stop in his hometown tonight.
I just enjoy actually getting to spend time with Karina and Christian. It's a treat to get to be here.
Taking a tour of the Animal Defense League facility.
You want to go see the kitties?
Also on the agenda, unveiling his new policy to protect animals and wildlife.
Animals are really considered members of the family.
The plan, called PAWS, aims to advance the welfare of animals.
I don't know of another presidential candidate that has ever released this kind of plan.
By putting an end to killing sheltered dogs and cats, proposing a $40 million grant giving federal dollars to help local rescues.
Animals deserve care and protection.
Also part of the plan, making animal abuse a federal crime and creating harsher penalties for unlawful breeding operations.
It's timely because it reflects a growing sentiment in the United States that we should be protecting and preserving animals and wildlife.
The second part of the plan involves protecting wildlife by strengthening the Endangered Species Act.
My hope is that my children and your children will grow up being able to appreciate the same majesty of the animal world around us.
Vanessa joins us live. Vanessa, did Castro take any swipes at President Trump while in town tonight?
Well, Sharon, that plan includes cracking down on overseas trophy hunting, which Castro used as a chance to blast President Trump, saying the Trump administration should never have reversed that policy in the first place. He said it's horrendous the way people are hunting those big game animals. But President Trump has been taking shots at Castro for a while now, saying the former San Antonio mayor is a failed presidential candidate. Sharon, Aaron.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Julian Castro is still trying to qualify for the next Democratic debate, which is in Houston next month. Castro is considered to be on the bubble. Candidates need to have at least 2% support in 4 polls. They also need to have 130,000 donors. They have until next week to make the cut.